try to move a little bit more expeditiously through the, and I'll start again with the general public. Do we have anybody in the room from the general public that would like to speak on this bill? Seeing none, Ms. Vaughn, do we have anybody online? Seeing none online, we'll move on to associations.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Ashley Harpstreet, the Executive Director for WAM and the Administrator for WIDA. I like the way that this bill is constructed, but a couple of thoughts for consideration. With tourism being our #2 industry, the tourism infrastructure is extremely important. So the convention space you guys were talking about eliminating, remember that you guys just invested into PRCA Hall of Fame, and there's going to be a new Hitching Post Historic District. Cheyenne has some lovely conference spaces, but we get maxed out real quick. And so there's been talks of like massive joint convention bureau type space stuff. Consideration also the airports being part of our economy and the tourism economy. Mr. Chairman, I think Co-Chairman Salazar has, yeah, okay. That's very important to this specific region. And then what's the last one? Sorry, lunch is getting airports. Oh, and then recreational facilities as well. With there being a new task force, I don't know if there's a way to, with the recreational funding we have with the outdoor rec trust fund, but that doesn't take care of the indoor rec stuff. So just food for thought.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Ms. Harpstreet? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. Any other associations? Okay. Mr. Durrell, if you'd like to comment on this bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Josh Durrell. I'm the CEO of the Wyoming Business Council. Ms. Harpstreet nailed a couple of those things, especially around airports. She mentioned the tourism economy, which is, of course, really important. It's also really important to recognize that airports are very critical for our businesses that conduct business outside the state, and having the ability to have air travel back and forth as well as terminals that can accommodate that are critical. And I know that the folks like Devin Brubaker in the Rock Springs Airport has provided a lot of economic impact information. I would suggest digging into that a bit. I would be even happy to round it up and provide it to you. I know there's a lot of studies that are done on air travel in the state. Just be careful with that one. I think she nailed it just from the business angle as well. I guess I have a question about the legislative liaison and maybe a little bit of commentary first. First and foremost, we welcome the idea that there's a strong nexus with the legislature. I think that's a really important thing to consider. I am a little confused, I think, as you were, Chairman, about the mechanics of these liaisons and their interplay with the BRC grants. So I'm just a little bit confused by that, and our communities will likely say that process is pretty tough anyway. And so adding more, I would say adding more regulation essentially to that, it's not going to help our communities move at the speed of business. And so I think we just want to be very careful with that. The other thing is that it does seem to indicate that there's a lot of questions about oversight from the perspective of BRC. And I just want to make sure that the liaisons have that they're a conduit, not just to be there to sort of provide oversight, but to provide a conduit of information back to the legislature. I think one of the things that we probably have illuminated in our discussions over the last few months is that there's sort of the great unknown about what the Business Council does and how it operates, even though it's laid out in statute pretty well and reported on. And so if we can make sure that those liaisons really are a conduit of information, and somehow there's a mechanism to get the information that is analyzed and worked at the Business Council back to the legislature, we would definitely appreciate that as well.
I think those are all good points, Mr. Durrell. I have a couple of questions for you about the bill draft as it sits here right now. And you heard me speak to the issue of creating undue burden. So we'll certainly work on that if we're going to have these liaisons in there to ensure there's no undue burden. But your point is well taken as far as making them a conduit, these legislative liaisons. I have a question about the comment or the additional language on page 5 where it says unless the asset will or is or will be owned by the applicant. And then we have the discussion in the comment from staff regarding the sale of that entity before the closeout of the grant or loan. Do you have any concerns with this language? I think this is in line with our Constitution, this language, that it needs to be under the full control of the state. But then there would be potential for the sale, and we don't want to prohibit that opportunity, if it's best for business. So I had made a suggestion that maybe if there is a sale, that the grant be refunded. Do you have any suggestions in that area?
Mr. Chairman, one of the things that we really work to do at the Business Council is build local capacity. And while that is in the know-how, as we talked about earlier, helping communities analyze their problems, work together to solve problems, many times that's without money. But one of the things that the Business Ready Communities or Building Resilient Communities program has done is it has created a way for communities to create revenue and also to benefit from the sale of those properties for economic development. So the proceeds of a sale, by and large, go back to the community so that it can be used again in economic development activities. We feel very strongly that communities are already hampered by the revenue that they can generate, and that in order to do economic development, if all of that money goes back to the state, they lose some of that ability. And so again, I think what this is calling for is an open conversation about the problem that it solves. If the problem is that the state needs that money, that's a different conversation, because right now we see it as the community needs that money to do economic development. So I have a little bit of caution about saying, let's just return all that money to the state, because right now most of that money stays in the community.
I think what I'm trying to get at here is that it's not the state in general, it's the taxpayer, that we're trying to create a fiduciary responsibility and accountability for. Here, the taxpayer has granted funds to a local government so that they can achieve economic development. For some reason, that local government has decided to sell that entity that they've invested into, and now what would happen with those proceeds? And you're suggesting that those proceeds should stay with the local government and be reinvested in economic development. I don't see any language that dictates that. Short of that, would it or should it go back to the state to be potentially reinvested in economic development or something else? So I think Representative Sherwood has some commentary she'd like to add here, or a question. Please, Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that revenue recapture agreement is in rules. So you don't see that in statute in terms of how those funds can be reused in the community for economic development projects. And I guess too, we should consider when we think about the money that's going into the BRC program, is that off of the state's investment income or is it off of our minerals industry? It's not necessarily off of the taxpayer's dollar.
I would say that both are the taxpayers' dollars. They started out as taxpayer dollars and they still are. Even if we've invested it and made it a bigger return off it, it's still, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayer for that, whether it's a business or whether it's individuals that purchase products from that business. But we can debate that at another time. I have always been confused by the recapture program. I do understand it's in rules, but it's, I don't think the general public understands it either. If I haven't grasped it very well, I don't know that it's really something that the public has a great grasp of. It's certainly something that we should be talking about at some point. I don't think we need to belabor it right now, but whether it goes into this bill as language for recapture to the local government or to the state government, either way, I think it probably should be included in this bill. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Durrell?
Mr. Chairman, I would prefer that it stays in rule, but that's just my preference.
Okay, thank you for that input. Are there any other questions or comments for Director or Mr. Durrell, I mean? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. With that, we'll go ahead and close public comment and we'll move on to the next bill. Ms. Ravalli, if you could come forward, please. Thank you for coming back up, Ms. Ravalli. And go ahead and proceed when you're ready.
This third bill draft that deals with the Wyoming Business Council and related programs is 27 LSO 0045. Its working draft is 0.4. And the short title is Wyoming Venture Capital Fund. This bill draft requires legislative review and appropriation of federal funds. These federal venture capital funds that come through the state small business credit from the American Rescue Plan. It limits authority to B11 or change during the interim, those specific federal funds, and it also requires appropriation for the general fund, any general fund expenditures for administration of the Wyoming Venture Capital Fund. So similar to the prior two bills, it relates to the administration of government. It amends the powers and duties of the Business Council related to these specified federal funds. It specifies budget and reporting requirements, specifies applicability, and prohibits expenditures of general funds as specified. The Wyoming Venture Capital Fund is not a program in the way that we've seen statutes for the Business Ready Community Program or for some of the other programs. Instead, it's just administered through the Business Council's general authority within the general statutes, and then the state's ability to accept federal funds generally, and some of the related provisions of that. So 9-12-104 is the Business Council statutes. These are the general duties and powers of the council. Subsection A lists out those duties and authorities, and this bill draft goes into about 3 of those to subject it to this new subsection C, this new limit on the venture capital funds. So these are conforming on page 2 and top of page 3, 4 places there, and then create this new subsection C. And again, there's not a statute for the Wyoming Venture Capital Program that has been legislatively created that we can just go in and tweak. Instead, we kind of have to bring in new language to talk about what program are we talking about, and then how are we trying to put sideboards on it. And so that's what subsection C on page 3 does. First, in accordance with other statutes that deal with the acceptance of federal funds and that the legislature reviews and appropriates them, any federal funds accepted by the council under the American Rescue Plan Act for the Small Business Credit Initiative or other federal funds accepted for capital programs or equity and venture capital shall be subject to legislative review and appropriation. Then on line 17, we notwithstand an existing statute that's 921005B2 and related 3 and 94206. That all deals with the acceptance and changes to budgets during the interim. It's known as the B11 process, so the B11 form. So acceptance or changes or redistributions to budgeting and specifically federal funds are done through this process. That says, notwithstanding that, the governor has that authority for these specific federal funds. These are the venture capital funds. They shall not be revised, changed, or redistributed or increased. So this would say that for this program, the funding needs to come through the Legislative Appropriations Act or similar legislation, not through a B11 process. Then finally, the council shall separately identify in its annual report and budget that it already submits all funds, investments, expenditures, contracts, investment performance, policies, and administrative expenses related to the federal funds specified in this subsection. And then that limitation at the end on page 4, lines 3 through 6 is no general fund shall be expended for administrative expenses related to this investment unless specifically appropriated. Section 2 just restates what you've seen in the other two bills, that this act shall not be construed to impair any existing contracts, agreements, or other obligations. And then Section 3 makes the act effective July 1st, 2027. So that is the bill quickly.
Thank you for that. Director Richards, I have a couple of questions I'm going to direct you to just get a better grasp on this bill for both the public and this committee. First of all, this venture capital fund, federal funding, what has been the historical volume of funds that have been awarded to the state of Wyoming and then granted out to, or not granted out, but used as investments in Wyoming businesses?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, you're exactly right. This started out with a federal program, and I believe there's about $20 million that has been invested as an equity position on behalf of the state using solely federal funds. But I believe where the state has can expect to receive about $50 million total once all three tranches are received in these federal funds. The original allocation came through the B11 process for administration purposes. The venture capital fund really does not proceed through the appropriations process because the finance folks have deemed this to be an investment and not an expenditure. So it doesn't currently proceed through the typical appropriations process. And so what this bill does is require notification of the investment portion and adherence to the appropriations process when it comes to administrative services.
Okay, thank you for that. Can you just opine on was this something that was directed by the Wyoming Business Council, or did our subcommittee come up with this bill on their own?
Mr. Chairman, this was entirely on behalf of the working group.
Thank you for that. Okay, I can see some things that I have concerns about, so we're going to have a discussion about this. And does anybody have any questions for Ms. Ravalli while she's up here? Okay, I think you've covered it all for now. We're going to have quite a few questions, but I think they're going to be more directed at the working group and Mr. Durrell when we get to that. So committee, and Mr. Durrell, if you'd please come forward. I think we're going to want to ask you some questions about this program and how investment decisions are being made currently. And if you have the data, what kind of investments have been made to date since this program started up? I think I understand why the committee is interested in, the working group was interested in this. We always would like to have legislative oversight over federal funds, ensuring that the strings that are attached to those funds are looked at and considered when we go to take these funds. I do have concerns about the process of investing into the equity of businesses within the borders of Wyoming and how the legislature might gum up that process, if you will. So with that, Mr. Durrell, if you could explain to us where the money's been invested to date and how much, and then what is the decision-making process? I'm probably most interested in knowing if there's any kind of nexus with the IFC, the Investment Funds Committee, where we have some volunteer expertise in the state advising on our state investments. This is a different offset. Those state investments rarely look at opportunities within the borders where this program does. So I'd like to know, are we bouncing our ideas off of the IFC at all? What is the expertise on your board that concludes how these funds would be invested? If you could address those questions for me, please.
a few things. One, through the State Small Business Credit Initiative, which is where this money comes from U.S. Treasury, we have developed with U.S. Treasury guidelines for the program, standards for the program, and we have developed the usage of these federal funds to be utilized in direct investments into Wyoming businesses, and we're able to take equity for that, as well as investments into what are called a fund of funds. So we can fund a fund that also engages in venture capital. To date, we have one fund in Breakthrough Capital that is a venture fund that is investing. They have obviously gathered their own funds as well, and so we're through that. But we're also investing directly. So we've invested in 11 Wyoming companies thus far. We have invested $19.9 million, as the director mentioned. Our average investment is we're about 22% of each of those rounds. So we have guidelines that we adhere to through U.S. Treasury, according to that program that we had presented to them and they have approved. What that has resulted in is about $184 million total capital for them. That means we're attracting other monies. As I mentioned before, this little seed has kind of brought in more. The process that we take is we have hired an investment manager who is from the venture capital space. He is in charge of looking at those deals and working within our investments committee from our board. We have some interaction with the Treasurer's Office and the IFC, but we do not utilize them fully, at least to date. And then it goes that we develop what's called a letter of intent. And then as that round works to close, then we engage and make a final decision on the investment and make the investment into the company. There are some things that we do that are a little bit different than a typical venture capital firm might do. So the goal of this program was not to put the state in a position where we are sort of seeking venture capital-like returns. We are trying to instigate and fix a problem. The problem that we are trying to fix is that in Wyoming, there was not enough capital to attract deal flow. Capital and deal flow are what make a venture system work. Because there wasn't enough capital, there was not enough deal flow. Well, there wasn't enough deal flow to attract enough capital. So what we said is we have a chicken and egg problem. Is you essentially have to work on one side of that equation. So we decided to utilize the State Small Business Credit Initiative through the U.S. Treasury to invest in Wyoming companies. When we get that equity, then we are able to attract other sources of funds for those companies. We maintain a small position in those rounds, and we like to be the last one into the round. So we can get pushed out of a round. We will say we have an intent to invest, but if other investments and investors come in, we actually get pushed out. And whereas a normal venture capital fund would not like that, we actually think that that is the best thing that could happen, is for us to get pushed out of a round, whether that round is too big or whether that round is full of investors and we don't need to play that game anymore, because our job is to instigate that activity, not to necessarily be the only check at the table or to be the ones that are kind of closing these deals. So that's our philosophy as well as our process. We're open to more, and we're looking at other states. North Dakota, New Mexico are states that we're looking to work with and understand how they do their investments, not just in venture, but in other areas, because investing in Wyoming companies and investing in Wyoming people is what we feel is very important. We think there are some ways to open that up. One thing, I think that you said this, and I think that I had the exact same concern with this. And I come at it from a perspective of I want to understand the problem that the subcommittee felt they were solving so that I could help. Because what I am concerned about is we are taking federal funds that were appropriated through the U.S. Treasury. So at some level, the U.S. Congress had a program that they said, run this program. U.S. Treasury then works with the executive branch at a state level, says, run this program. And then all of a sudden, somehow the state legislature is inserting itself into this process. And while I am happy to report. I'm happy to bounce ideas off of. It feels like gumming up the system, to use your words, is exactly what this is going to do. And it doesn't help us act at the speed of business. And so I'm open to understanding why, and trying to solve that problem.
Mr. Drell, did you attend the work group meetings so that you could have those questions answered when they were working on this?
Mr. Chairman, we had very specific questions. I'm happy to provide those as well if the committee has not. We had very specific questions and we answered those questions, but we did not get much opinion on what was going to happen next.
Okay, thank you for your input on that. We'll take that under advisement and certainly look at this very carefully to make sure we don't create undue burden as we look at this. I'd love to see what I think you said 11 companies that have been invested in. I'd like to see that. I hope that there's a preponderance of them in the legacy energy industry, since that industry has been singled out, if you will, by the likes of BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, where their investment opportunities have been reduced. So I hope that you've leaned into it in that regard. We'd like to see those 11 companies and what the progress of that is. Also, I think you mentioned that you have brought on one investment expert. Is that what I heard you say, to help advise your board on these investments? Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay. And can you just kind of give us some of the background expertise of that person, that individual?
Yes, sir. He has a number of years of experience. He worked for a large firm, Deloitte, I believe, and worked in their investment side of their house, and worked with private and venture capital funds.
Okay, thank you. And did you by chance reach out to our investment team at the Treasurer's Office? Because they also have private equity experts.
Mr. Chairman, so our investment team does work with the Treasurer's Office. I think there's an opportunity to integrate more there. I think that the Treasurer's Office, as well as the investment team, has a lot of expertise, but also they can provide a little bit more, sounding board for some of these investments as well.
And how are the investment opportunities coming to you? Or how did you advertise that you have this fund and you have this opportunity to help companies in Wyoming out?
Mr. Chairman, the way that we do that is we do advertise that out through various channels. One of the things that we've done is we've run basically it's a summit each year with companies that are either looking at venture, or we're working with companies that are already engaged in venture to come to that summit. And we bring in speakers, we bring in industry folks and other investors into that to sort of bring people in together to work on that. The other way that we do that is through things like Kickstart. I think if you look at Kickstart, one of the companies that is a real success story for Wyoming in mining is DISA, and they actually started as a Kickstart program. They actually very first started out in the market expansion world, as we talked about that today, moved along to Kickstart. We got them to a spot where they were looking at investments, and as I think I might have mentioned to this committee, they're now at a spot where we may not be able to be an investor in them anymore. They're going to get too big, and they're going to go past where our program can help them, which is exactly what you want. You want to create that launch pad for these companies. And so we also find them from that sort of hopper, if you will, where Kickstart is the beginning of it as they work through that. And then we find companies that are looking to take those rounds on.
Okay, one last thing I'd like to go over with you. We talked about the legislature potentially gumming things up. We meet once a year to vote on things like this. If we were to get involved in the approval of these federal funds being sent out. So how often are you making these decisions as a board and then going ahead and making the investments? How often throughout a year, a 12-month period, would that happen?
Mr. Chairman, these rounds are opening and closing at the speed of business, not at the speed of government. We don't actually set a quarterly time frame. We make these decisions as they are opening and closing rounds, venture rounds within their business. So as you look at these series that they're working on, they could happen at any time. So the idea that we don't even have a quarterly cadence to it, because again, we're trying to work at the speed of business. And again, that's sort of one of our mantras.
Okay, so even though these are federal funds, they're still taxpayer funds. So I got to ask you, is this one individual that you hired, is he making those decisions on these rapidly happening things, or are you convening a board meeting to make these decisions? And is it your board that's determining?
Mr. Chairman, it is our investment committee, not the full board, that makes these decisions.
And so can that committee meet at any given time and work at the speed of business?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it can.
Okay, thank you. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think what brought this up to the subcommittee was the white paper we received, April 13th from the LSO staff. And it's on page 13 where we get to venture capital. I think maybe page 12. And I think the flag was the last couple paragraphs to facilitate the administration of this fund. In 23, Business Council set aside $951,000 and one temporary FTE. So it's something that the legislature doesn't really see. I think this is internally. And who makes that decision of how much, I guess, would be a question for the director. And then it shows for fiscal year 25-26 biennium, there'll be included $900,000. I would take it that for as more dollars going to that. So who oversees the spending of that money and the hiring of that? I think that's what gave the subcommittee the red flag, that, there's no legislative oversight of that.
I think that this is one of the issues that this committee has with the Wyoming Business Council in general, because it is an off the books kind of entity in that we don't dictate your FTEs. We don't really control anything. We give a lump sum to the Wyoming Business Council, and then the governor and the council make those decisions internally. But maybe you could address this specific one for us, this FTE, and how the legislature did or did not participate and who did make the decisions, Mr. Durrell.
Mr. Chairman, I think the idea of off the books is hopefully it was just an unfortunate slip of the tongue, because we are incredibly transparent. I think all of our information is
that
available.
wasn't my intent to show a lack of transparency. It's just a lack of legislative oversight. I think that's what I'm trying to get at, and that's our concern, and that's what we're trying to address here. So if you could just answer those questions for us, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. So first of all, those are not general funds. Those are administration funds set forth by the federal program to be utilized in running that program. Those funds are utilized over the course of the program, not in one given year or one biennium. So while those funds were requested in those amounts, those funds are not to pay one employee over the course of a year or two. Those are to run the entire program. Again, those are funds from the U.S. Treasury's program in accordance with their program guidelines. So that's probably why the legislature was not included in it, because it already has oversight from the State Small Business Credit Initiative through the U.S. Treasury. And trust me, they do plenty of oversight.
And then to the other question, who makes the decisions on, that's going to go forward, we're going to hire the FTE, and then these are the decisions. I think you answered in my previous question that you have a board that makes the investment decisions. Did that board also make the FTE decisions?
Mr. Chairman, that is ultimately my decision.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So who sets the amount that you can use for administration? Is the federal government saying you got a percentage of 2% or what per year? And then who's setting the salary? Is that going through the executive branch at the state level? Through the budget department or whatever, or A&I or?
Mr. Durrell.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Larson, the program through the U.S. Treasury defines what percentage of the program you are able to use for administration costs. we utilize that money to not only hire and pay the salary of the individual or individuals, if we choose to work on that, as well as any administration that could be other vendors for data information, that could be for as I mentioned, for the summit itself, for all of the administration of that program, that is set by the federal government. In terms of who sets the salary, that is ultimately me who sets that salary. We are outside of A&I's purview for that. But at the same time, if you'd like to look, you can go to Wyopen, and I'd be happy to provide the salary information for all of my staff as it's been provided, and I'd be happy to provide it again.
Okay, all right. Any further questions, comments for the for Mr. Durrell? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much for opining on this particular bill. Is there any other public comment that I should be aware of? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment on this bill, and then we'll move on to our final bill, which is the consensus grants. And looks like it's Director Richards is going to go over this one with us. And just briefly, I'm going to turn things over to my co-chair for just a moment. You guys can go ahead and proceed, and I'll be right back.
Director Richards.
Good afternoon, members of the committee, Chairman Salazar, Don Richards, Legislative Service Office Administrator for the Budget and Fiscal Division. In anticipation of or prior to a review of the bill before you, having worked with me for the last 2 years, you know that I like summary matrices to make things hopefully a little bit easier. Apologies for one typo on line 3 there. Nonetheless, the Joint Minerals Committee requested a draft. It has not yet been made public, but I have summarized it here for the benefit of the committee. And the JAC Working Group has their starting point in the form of LSO Draft 41, Working Draft 05 before you. Surprisingly, the two committees started at arguably two completely different starting points. The Minerals Committee started with the 2014 legislation, which was the last time the county consensus funding was appropriated. And the working group arguably started with the House budget amendment, which was adopted on the House side and was not adopted on the Senate side. But surprisingly, the conclusions were quite similar. So you can see that both entities elected to have a distribution of the appropriation to be 75% on a per capita basis, 25% using the inversed assessed valuation. So that gives a little bit of help to the less wealthy entities. And keep in mind, historically, this has been 80-20. And both entities, I think, worked independently and ended up at that 75-25, which was different than both of their starting points. The population determination is slightly different. The House position is the 3-year rolling average, recognizing that over the course of a decade, the decennial census, some communities can change in size quite dramatically. The Joint Minerals Committee did not have robust discussion on this, but they are continuing to resort to the decennial census. I believe you'll hear from the County Commissioners Association and perhaps others who recommended the JAC working group position. Third, the consensus requirement is different, or is the same between both entities, is different the way than it's previously been done. But the county and at least 50% of the incorporated populations would have to concur on this. It used to be 70% of the population within the incorporated community. And I think the common example is in Natrona County, where Casper and Natrona County could come to an agreement without any participation from Evansville or Mills or bar none. The uses, again, are very similar. Both entities suggest that the eligible purposes would include capital construction and major maintenance, which is the current approach. You may wish to consider further defining that, particularly when it comes to capital construction, there's a question of, is everything a capital? So is equipment or vehicles considered a capital investment or not? In terms of approval, both entities ended essentially at the same place, where the Joint Minerals Committee elected to have a submission of the applications to OSLI, but no formal vote by the SLIB board. And they did that with some discussion, and just to share with you their thoughts, they did not want any political behavior to override the agreements made at the county level. So the language in the bill before you, if you wish to go with that, which we understood was generally the desire of the working group, is actually included in the staff note if you wish to adopt that. The working group was silent on the magnitude of the appropriation, but the Joint Minerals Committee elected to have a $200 million appropriation, $100 million per year for the first 2 years, and they called that jump-starting this program, and then $50 million thereafter. They funded that from the LSRA, and they would make that a continuing appropriation, so it would be in statute and not require subsequent legislative authorization or appropriation. And you can see on lines 6 through 8, the working group left a blank there. They did not make any decision as to the amount or source of funding. There's a little bit of a difference with respect to the reversions, whereas the Joint Minerals Committee revert all prior unspent appropriations, and SLIB staff indicated from the OSLI at the last meeting that up to $1.6 million. We have not been able to confirm that, but they indicate that $1.6 million may be unspent dating back to 2011 through 2014. Again, we have not been able to confirm that yet. And of course, the working group did not take any action. However, they did take action on reverting new funds, meaning funds that are appropriated through any program adopted by the legislature would be remain available for 2 years, but we wouldn't, as a state, get ourselves in the position where you have a decade-old $1.6 million going forward. So those are the differences. At minimum, we wanted to point out what your colleagues on the other committee working on the same topic landed, and compare that to the working group. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Ravalli to walk you through the legislation, if there's no further questions.
Senator Larson.
Mr. Chairman, maybe I missed it. In the past, when we did have this, what was the available funds? Was it, I thought it was 70 million
Director
per
Richards.
year.
Mr. Chairman, 70 million is about the average, but it varied pretty dramatically by year. I believe the low was about less than 20 million and the high was over 100 million. So it was dependent upon available funds.
And Director, those funds, that funds availability, was that just during the budgeting process that the legislature made that determination back in those years? Or was there some other determining factor as to what the funds available, or was it a particular source of funds that determined that?
Excellent question, Mr. Chairman. It was not tied to a revenue stream, so sales tax or severance tax. It was from the general fund. It started out, I believe, at a low of $18 million, and at its high was, I believe, over, yes, 191 million. So it varied pretty dramatically based upon the conditions of the state. That was contemplated. If you go back to 1999, there was a select committee chaired by Representative Tipton here in Lander, who changed the distribution of severance taxes and federal mineral royalties, but put in a proviso that says in any years where prices or production are particularly high, that the state would share that with the recipients who receive funds below the cap. So that's kind of the genesis for this program, whereby municipalities, counties receive money below the cap. All of a sudden, they are capped out prices of oil in the case of 2008 went to $145 per barrel. And you will see, indeed, the legislature did share in that windfall of revenue when times were good, and they passed on $191 million through this program to the recipients of severance taxes and FMRs.
So it kind of begs the question then, and maybe this isn't something you can answer directly, but here we're trying to create a business development opportunity for local governments, and yet we're tying it to when we have a windfall. So there's not a really good nexus there. Was that the only time that 191 million was a one-time deal? So were there other reasons that they distributed different amounts? I mean, looking at it, we had MRG program going concurrently, as well as I assume BRC was concurrent as well. So we had three programs then, if that's true, to address these business-ready opportunities for local governments. But then this one was just kind of a third one that used excess funds. Is that a good description of what was happening back then?
Mr. Chairman, in terms of the amounts, I think that is accurate. In terms of the purposes, and colleagues in local government may have a different perspective, but I think this really was not intended for economic development, but was intended for infrastructure. And it may or may not be true, but during that boom, there was also a lot of additional employment in the state, both in the coal mines as well as in the natural gas fields, the oil fields. And a good portion of this went towards infrastructure, emergency services, water, sewer, infrastructure that supported the economic activity at the time that generated those robust revenues.
So there's the nexus. Thank you for that. Seems to me that we've already determined through all of our business ready grant program and the discussions that this committee's had that infrastructure is indeed part of economic development. So I think we've got the nexus there. Now it's just a matter of finding a longer term source than just excess funds during the good times. So thank you for that rundown. Any other questions for the director? Okay, Ms. Ravalli, if you'd like to take us through the bill.
Thank you. The bill is 27 LSO 0041. You should have working draft 0.5. The short title is County Consensus Funding Program. The act generally relates to the administration of government. It creates and codifies the County Consensus Funding Program for local government projects, puts in place requirements, specifies duties, creates this account to hold these funds, requires reporting, and then has a place for an appropriation. That amount that you will see when we get to the back has not yet been determined. Then finally requires rulemaking. This would be a new section 1 within 930-101. Create new language in the green books to put this program in. And the staff comment there on page 2 just reminds the committee that this was modeled on the 2026 House Bill Amendment 1 when this conversation first started in most recent years. Then the staff comment makes a note about capital improvement projects and capital projects, which Dawn referenced, for your consideration. And keep in mind that in the past, this was non-codified law. This bill is taking that non-codified concept that could be changed every year in every appropriations bill, and was, a little bit shorter than you might find a full program in the green books. So this is codifying that. It suggests in that staff comment to pay close attention to what the purpose, what these funds can be used for, and where it references capital improvement or capital project. So this is the County Consensus Funding Program, Chapter 30. It's created, it's administered by the Office of State Lands and Investments. On page 3, on and after July 1st of each year, OSLI would distribute the grants and funds available in the county consensus account and subject to any conditions and requirements to be allocated as follows. So that account is created in this bill draft, and it would not have a funding mechanism in this bill draft, as Dawn explained. it would be subject to legislative appropriation as currently drafted. So the Minerals Committee has contemplated where the funding would come from and put that in their bill draft. This bill draft would just be subject to legislative appropriation. Then the formula is as Don described it. It's there on BI through the end of page 4. And it's that 75% for the per capita, and then the 25% by the inverse assessed valuation factor. So that formula is there on the bottom of page 3 and page 4. Then subsection C specifies broadly that the funds granted may only be expended for capital projects, major maintenance and repair of existing public facilities and infrastructure, including expenditures undertaken by special districts. That's a place where the Minerals Committee has chosen to define capital projects. Let's see, on page 5, subsection D is that consensus part of the bill. To be eligible for grants under this section, the Board of County Commissioners and the governing bodies of not less than 50% of the incorporated cities and towns would need to certify to the State Loan and Investment Board that they have reached agreement on the capital projects. The staff comment on the bottom of page 5 includes some potential text that, again, the Minerals Committee adopted this, that kind of just put into place a process for the Board of County Commissioners to solicit proposals and for how that would work. There'd be a public hearing. They would then submit them to the Office of State Lands and Investments and just kind of further define how that process would work. This wasn't in the old non-codified programs that existed in the bills, but this could be created in here to further define how it's intended to work and make, I guess, more transparent how that process would work in practice. On page 7, there's a definition just of population. Then page 7, the staff comment includes some recommendations that could be put in the bill, just about nothing in the bill prohibiting the governor from making alternate recommendations for appropriations to city, towns, and counties, and that the Office of State Lands and Investment and any other business or the Business Council, any other governmental agency could be used to consult with and join in on this program or lend their expertise. Subsection F relates to the excess funds after final project costs. This provision provides that they would not revert except as provided in subsection G, but that they could be applied by the recipient to any remaining county level project that would have been agreed upon in consensus under the process for the 50% or as it is in subsection D. Then subsection G says that funds granted to a recipient governing body for any project that will not be encumbered, that those would revert to the county consensus account not later than 2 years after the appropriation was made. Subsection H provides that not later than July 1st, 2028 and July 1st of each year thereafter, the Board of County Commissioners who receive funds would report to the Office of State Lands Investments on the projects that they've applied the funds to, the status of the projects, and how much has been funded in whole or in part. Then the reporting requirement to the legislature is that OSLI would then report not later than November 1st. And I'm in subsection J on page 9, report to JAC and the Minerals Committee on the program. 930-102 on the bottom of page 9, lines 18 through 23, and on to page 10 is that funding program account, and it's a codified account. Funds in the account would be continuously appropriated except for the reversion we just talked about, and they're for the purposes that we've talked about, the Office of State Lands and Investments to distribute as provided in this bill draft. All funds in the account can be invested, and the investment earnings from the account shall be credited to the account, and the account could accept any other gifts, grants, or contributions. Section 2 on page 10 is the appropriation that just says no number for now. And for now, it says from the general fund. There is appropriated an unknown amount for the purposes of providing grants for the program. It would be for the period beginning July 1st, 2027. And then it would be continuously appropriated as provided in the account and subject to the reversion program we talked about. Section 3 provides that OSLI should promulgate rules necessary to implement the act. And Section 4 makes the act generally effective July 1st, 2027, except for the rules, which can begin to become promulgated immediately upon completion of the act. So I will take any questions on the bill itself.
All right, any questions for Ms. Ravalli? I have a couple. As we're going through this, was it contemplated exactly how the votes would be tallied within the consensus vote, and putting that into statute so it'd be clear across the state and that every county would establish it? For instance, my understanding when we did this in the budget, the intent was that there would be one vote for the county, one vote for each of those government entities that meet the criteria. But as I read this language, I'm not sure that I see it that way. And I'm wondering if this language doesn't actually give the county an equal vote to all of the local governments within the county. Has any of that been contemplated? And am I reading it correctly or incorrectly that the county commission has been given a lot more weight in their vote, the way it's worded, Ms. Ravalli?
So this language, Mr. Chairman, this language I think you're talking about is on page 5, lines 19 through 24, which provides that the Board of County Commissioners and the governing bodies of not less than 50% of the incorporated cities and towns in the county would need to certify that they've reached agreement. So I believe that language is modeled on prior iterations of this in the past that Don discussed. Maybe he's read the language a little bit closer, plus direction by this committee when requesting this bill draft.
Director Richards?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my colleague, Councilor Reveille, is correct that the first phrase of this line does come from prior language. And in both cases, both the pre-2014 and the bill draft before you, the county commission arguably serves in a super position, meaning they could veto, but any one municipality does not have that same capacity. So in this negotiation, if you will, the county commission must agree, and then 50% of the municipalities must also agree. But if the county commission does not agree, then that is not an eligible project.
Okay, so for the committee, this is something we're going to have to contemplate as we move forward as to whether that's really what we're looking for or something different. Representative Sherwood?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wouldn't that also work in reverse, theoretically, to say, so my community, my county says, hey, we want to put together a list, and the city of Laramie's like, no, we're not interested. And then Rock River's like, we're not interested. So then the county can't move forward. I mean, I think it works both ways.
Yeah, it would take greater than 50% of those local governments concluding that they don't agree with the county. I think that's their veto power, if you will. But I'm not sure that's what was contemplated, because as I recall the debate during the budget discussion, it was each entity got one vote, including the county commission. So this is a different approach. I guess it also begs the question on the funding. If agreement wasn't reached, my understanding last year when we debated this was that those funds would stay in a sub-account, if you will, for that particular county until they did reach agreement. So in subsequent years, that funding would still be available if they didn't come to consensus. And I don't necessarily read that this way in this bill, where I read the reversion portions of it in later portions here. Specifically, page 8, paragraph G on lines 8 through 15. We don't talk about any sub-accounts. We just talk about a county consensus account. So would that be available to that same county in subsequent years if they could not come to consensus in a particular year? And I don't think the language delineates that.
Mr. Chairman, and certainly my colleague can correct me. My understanding is that they would have essentially 2 years to come to an agreement. So if that fell on an election year, you might have a chance of working with a different group of elected city councilmen and county commissioners. But after that 2 years, if it was not approved and then encumbered for the purposes intended, then those funds would revert.
Senator French?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question along those lines would be, if they, year one, they can't come to an agreement, year two, they do, are they eligible for 2 years' worth of funding?
I'll let Director Richards answer that, but I would believe that they would be. And I think that's my point, is that the original intent back during the budget debate was that it would continue on. There wasn't contemplated a 2-year deadline that they had to come to agreement. Of course, their projects are getting long in the tooth as that time is going by as well. So you'd think there'd be pressure to get the money allocated. But Director, if you could address that, would year two's allocation be available if they came to consensus, as well as year one that was forgone because they didn't have consensus?
Mr. Chairman, it would be my read that both years could be approved, as the chairman indicated. I would also concur that in the budget amendment, there was no reversion language, and the communities could have unlimited time to come to an agreement.
Other comments or questions? Senator French?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't see them not coming to an agreement, because there's a lot, every county out there's got a lot of needs, every town, city, county, special district. They have a lot of needs out there. Like my county in the northwest part of the state, for example, has the most county roads of any county in the state, like 650 miles of county road, something like that. So there's a great expense out there, and the cities have expenses. You know, we gave considerable property tax relief, which I thoroughly supported and agree on, but that also had an effect on some of these special districts and some of these things. So anyway.
Okay, any further comments on the bill draft? I have one more. Oh, go ahead. Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just going back to the conversation we were having earlier about county and municipality and the voting type weight, and the good representative mentioning Rock River and Laramie. Well, I mean, Albany County is pretty easy because it's Rock River and Laramie. Platte County, we've got Hartville and Chugwater and Glendo and Guernsey and Wheatland. And if you've ever been to any of the town halls in some of those smaller communities, they get a little like wild, wild west. And so when you start talking about those, I mean, so this is a conversation we had in our subgroup, and it's a conversation I think we need to continue to have, is if we're not careful, it could become a very gridlocked process. And we've got 53 people represented in Hartville, 53, maybe not people, but 53 households that then have the power to move as if they were the same as Wheatland. And so that is the battle. And I'm not saying I have an answer, and I'm definitely agreeing we need to continue a conversation, but I would challenge, as we look at this, these counties that have lots of small municipalities, that just gets more and more complicated and something we have to look at, especially when some of these smaller municipalities, they struggle to get along with each other. And so that's just that kind of working through as they're talking about this money. So not so much a question, Mr. Chairman, just more of a statement of things we're going to have to think about as we look at this bill draft.
I think this is a very good thing, actually. I think this forces them to work together and come to conclusions that are good for the entire region as well as the smaller communities that typically the bigger communities aren't thinking about. If suddenly the smaller communities have a vote and impact how they're going to move forward on these projects, they're going to give those smaller communities some deference. And I think it's only good to create these situations where they can all work together. I think that's really why my understanding is that when these types of projects went before the SLIB board, it was pretty easy to rubber stamp it because they'd already been through all these battles to come up with really what is the best use of these funds. Representative Pendergraph.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've discussed this a bit before, and I'm not necessarily looking for an answer, but as we consider this balance of power thing, there are also small communities that are very close to each other that happen to be in different counties. And so there may be a project where you involve two counties and some communities. We just need to give some thought to how that might work. And off the top of my head, obviously, I don't have any answers, but I can just see that as an issue because county lines don't necessarily mesh with local interest.
Yeah, I think that leads to my next question. I think that those things would be worked out through both funding from both sides, both counties, and they'd have to come to those consensus on both sides. But along those lines, Mr. Valley, in this program, there really isn't an assurance written into this language that the project will be completely funded once this grant is awarded. We have that in this other bill, 27 LSO 44 on page 7, where we talk about 9-12-601 Delta, where it's a part of the BRC program. We're looking for an assurance that this grant will complete the project. Should we have that kind of language in this bill as well, where we're going to complete the project, kind of running off of what Representative Pendergraph said? Well, our side of the county line got the project done, but the other side didn't. If we had that type of assurance that before the grant goes out, maybe we could force the two counties to work together in that situation. Your thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think that's a good point that goes to kind of one of the staff comments and the language that's on page 4, lines 16, 17, and 18. Really, the only criteria for projects or expenditures of these funds are that they be expended for capital projects, major maintenance and repair of existing public facilities and infrastructure. So again, there's no requirement that the entity or that the subdivision or the local government show how it's going to be fully funded or any matching kind of requirement or any requirement for what the program or what the project can look like. Simply, this is basically that subsection is the entire kind of program itself, the eligibility criteria, and those terms aren't defined either. So they could be further defined by rule and regulation.
I think that's going to be an effort of this committee when we meet again, is to put some sideboards on this in that regard. And I think to the staff, we're going to need to figure out what terms needed to be defined to create those sideboards. One of the terms that I'd like to make sure we've really nailed down is infrastructure. And so I'd like to make sure we get that defined in a way that the legislature can support it. I've seen some other definitions of infrastructure that cause pause. And I think that's all of my questions for this particular bill. Anyone else? Representative Alaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really like this. This is going to give our small towns a breath of life, a chance, instead of always being beat over the head by the big town. And I really, really like this. I would like to put the revision instead of to 2 years to 4 years. Thank you.
Okay. Keep that in mind as we go into our next meeting. Have all your amendments ready to go. That would be my suggestion. Is there anything else for the good attorney? All right, seeing none, thank you, Ms. Ravalli. We appreciate that. We'll go ahead and open this up to public comment. Again, I'll start with the general public. Is there anyone in the audience or online that would like to address this bill? Anyone online? Did I miss somebody? Yeah, I think I'm gonna give them an opportunity. Well, during public comment, we'll just take care of it during public comment. We're cruising right along here, so we'll get the stakeholders during this time frame. Okay, and so no public individuals. Now do we have, we'll go ahead and get those. Oh, come on up. Thank you for being here.
Beth Blackwell, Grants and Loan Specialist for the City of Newcastle. A couple of things you were talking about historically in my position at OSLI for when I worked there. Countywide consensus was generally the first money put in the pot when they were trying to fund a project. Those funds either were used as matching funds for MRG. Some communities are only eligible for 50% through the MRG program. So those countywide consensus funds would come in, and on the application, it would show that their match funds were approved. That's a benefit because you know those funds are ready to go. So if you award other grant funding, that's kind of the insurance that BRC would get in addition. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing. How do you make sure these funds are spent? But the other thing is sometimes these funds were used to fund the whole project, 100% of the project. And so it's important, I think, depending on what you're using the funds to match, if you are using them to match, you do get extra points sometimes when you're getting scored on a grant application of whether your grant funds are approved or your matching funds are approved or they're pending. So that's one cautionary thing I would let you all know, that approved matching funds is beneficial on a grant application and a loan application.
Blackwell, that's an excellent point, and we do need to take that into account. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Absolutely. The other things I would mention is in my 13 years at OSLI, there was maybe 2 instances where counties and communities couldn't agree. One size doesn't fit all. Every county had a different process. I can speak for what I've learned for Weston County is every year every time the pot came around, they would sit at a table and figure out who had what and who needed what at that time. Some years Upton got more money than Newcastle. I can tell you Laramie County used to do it based on population. You have X% of the population in our county, you get X% of the amount of funds that we were given. Generally, these funds were appropriated for a biennium, but all of the funds were available that first day of the biennium so that large projects could use the bulk of that money. And then if those projects came in under budget, the leftover funds could be used to reallocate to smaller projects or consolidate all the leftover money into one bigger project. So some of those things that you've been talking about is it's hard. Sometimes the first time you come to a table, a small community may not have a project, but the second time they may have 5 because this is encouraging them to go back and plan and to make sure that they have something to come to the table with and ask for those funds. Countywide consensus is absolutely not economic development funding, but it does benefit economic development in the sense of infrastructure projects are economic development. Just how it is in Wyoming. If we start ending up on the front page of a paper and we're not able to provide clean drinking water, our tourism is going to be hampered. And so when I say infrastructure is economic development, it is. But I think countywide consensus is special in the sense that it allows communities to take care of what they own already. It takes the burden off of the mineral royalty grant program in the sense that you're not likely to have an emergency roof leaking. Countywide consensus funds would have come in and taken care of that roof before it started leaking. So it allows some preventive work versus reactive work. And so Countywide consensus, I think, is something that's been missing in the funding circle for the last 10 years. Even though there's been a little bit of money left on the table, it's not sufficient to help our communities. As you've heard me speak, the cost of a foot of water line has tripled. It's over $600 for just 1 foot of water line. So the mineral royalty grant program has lost pace with keeping up with inflation. The amount that is available through that program is, I believe, about 16 million for this biennium. When I started, it was 32.4 million, so it's half. And so we're not even making a dent into what is needed in the state. And so unfortunately, you'll hear me preach this a lot, is we just don't have the population to generate the revenue needed at the local level for them to continue to do what they want to do. If we were double the size, triple the size, our local communities and our counties would be able to help themselves. I don't think it's that they're not trying to. I think it's completely a matter of we just don't have the population for some communities to generate the revenue needed to do very expensive infrastructure projects.
Thank you, Ms. Blackwell. Any questions or comments from Ms. Blackwell? I have one. I thank you again for your insight, especially since your time on the OSLI effort that involved this particular program. Just a quick question on those entities that didn't come to consensus. Do you recall how that was handled as far as the funds? Were they available at a later date? Was it lost? And having it available at a later date, do you believe that would be a motivator to continue working until they found consensus?
Mr. Chairman, if I remember correctly, those entities were able to eventually come to consensus. A lot of times they would call and say, what do? We can't agree. And I'd say, go back to the table. You got to figure it out. And you got to do what's in the best interest of the masses. And so sometimes when you have a lot of players at the table, there's going to be winners and losers. Sometimes when you have 3 people at the table, hopefully everyone can walk away and feel like a winner. I just really think what you're experiencing right now is some of the frustration that I had at OSLI is the need is great. The available funding is not up where the need is, and it never will be, unless we all turn into billionaires and we start paying for it ourselves.
And I think we've received testimony that kind of goes back to your comment about infrastructure being economic development, where communities said, don't bring us any new businesses until we get our water and sewer in line so that we can take care of the people we already have. So this committee has heard that loud and clear, and we think this is a proper role of government that can really help with economic development. I think we're pretty well focused on it. So hopefully we'll come up with a good funding source and get this accomplished.
Absolutely. I would say that it is it's difficult out there. I've been on one side, now I'm on the other side, and what is economic development to Newcastle is different than what it is to Cheyenne. And so trying to find a program that works for us is difficult. So I would like to see less very small specific pots of money and more, or some big pots of money that allow some flexibility, you know, business ready communities, or as Jeremiah with the county commissioners have said, family ready communities. It truly comes down to, are we providing what we need to give to our communities? And what is needed in one community is not what's needed in the next. And I think we have to start thinking outside the box and trying to solve our problems a different way, and trying to use all the tools that we have in our toolbox, where sometimes we've picked our favorites and played with our favorites. Rather, I applaud you guys for looking at all the tools and seeing how we adjust those tools to work best for us now, given our challenges now, because they're ever changing. And what was our demand 10 years ago is not what it is today, and it's not going to be what it is in 10 years. So
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Blackwell. Appreciate your input. Okay, with that, and again, we don't have anybody online. Is that correct, Ms. Ms. Vaughn? Okay, very good. Let's have the stakeholders come forward, please. And this will be your opportunity. I think we're going to close out with your testimony now. Is there anybody else in the room that would like to testify on this bill before I let them know that they're going to get the last word? Okay. And is there anyone online, Ms. Vaughn? Okay. You guys will have the last word. So however you'd like to present to us, we're ready to hear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Ashley Harpstreet, Wyoming Association of Municipalities and Wyoming Economic Development Association, joined by Jeremiah Ryman, who is the director for Wyoming County Commissioners Association. We're very pleased all three of our organizations are 100% in alignment and in consensus. I want to start off today by building on the testimony we provided previously to this committee around economic development funding. It is important to remember the strategy, alignment, and accountability. We have consistently heard from our member communities that the system works best when it's transparent, coordinated, and tied to measurable outcomes. The request we are bringing forward today is grounded in exactly those principles. Through our regional meetings, surveys, and constant communication with communities around the state, one theme has emerged above all others. Housing and water infrastructure are the #1 issue facing nearly every Wyoming community. These are foundational. Without them, no other economic development strategy can succeed. What communities need to compete and what businesses are asking for are the same things: infrastructure ready to go, certainty in a regulatory environment, and a community that is prepared to welcome growth. When those building blocks are in place, Wyoming wins. When they're not, we lose because the opportunity wasn't there, because also wasn't because the opportunity wasn't there, but it was because we were not ready. The math on infrastructure is stark, and for our smaller communities, it simply does not work. Lander, since we are here today, as one example, has $47 million available to put towards their capital construction projects for immediate needs of $109 million that are all high priority. And those are that they have in front of them, with only 7,500 people within the community in their municipal boundaries to pay for it. These projects are not wants, they are needs, and the gap is not unique to Lander. It is the reality for communities across the state and why we're here today asking for your support. In previous testimony, I spoke about the building blocks of economic development as framed by WIDA, and I want to return to that foundation because it is directly relevant with what we're asking for today. Think of building a strong economy like baking a cake. The building blocks, stable infrastructure, housing, workforce, and community capacity are that cake. The economic development policy tools, incentives, and recruitment strategies are the icing. But no matter how good the icing is, it cannot be held together without a solid cake beneath it. Too often we have focused on the icing while the foundation remains unfinished, underfunded, and uneven from one community to the next. That has to change. What we are proposing is a consensus block grant funding model, a baseline of funding distributed by county that brings communities together around a shared infrastructure plan. This approach directly addresses what we have heard repeatedly from our members. They want less centralization and more coordination and regionalization, transparent capital deployment, cross-agency alignment, and accountability for how those dollars are spent. This model delivers all of that. It requires communities to come to consensus, which builds local ownership and ensures that investment reflects actual priorities on the ground rather than priorities handed down from the top. It ties funding to a plan which creates the accountability and transparency this committee has rightly demanded. And it provides the baseline certainty that smaller and unorganized communities desperately need to begin building the capacity to complete the work. Wyoming communities are ready to do the work, and this investment is about building something that lasts. When the state partners with local communities in a structured and accountable way, the return is not just infrastructure, it is a stronger tax base, more competitive communities, and a Wyoming that is positioned to grow for generations to come. This committee has demanded accountability and transparency, and this model delivers both. We ask that you invest in a system that rewards planning, rewards consensus, and rewards the long-term commitment that Wyoming cities and towns bring to this work every single day. And then as a side note, I wanted to let the committee know they asked for me to survey my membership about water infrastructure needs. As of today, I have a third of the communities responded of 31 out of 99, so almost a third. There's $26.5 billion that they can account for in the ground with $1.7 billion in immediate needs. So that's a third, if that helps you with just when we're talking just water infrastructure. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
could you say that number again? please?
Sure. 26.5 billion dollars are what they know roughly is in the ground. We're also waiting for the Senate file, and I forgot the number right now. That was the infrastructure and water study. And I'm working closely with DEQ because some of it is we don't know, literally what we don't know. So this is a guesstimate without getting in there. 26.5 billion, and there's 1.7 billion in immediate projects of need.
Go ahead, Representative Haroldson.
Thank you very much. So is that the 26.5 billion, is that today's standard of cost?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you. And the 1.7 as well as today's standard of cost.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, correct. I also asked them, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay to tell you, a lot of open-ended response questions that I'm happy to share with the committee to talk about if they set aside reserves and how much are they setting aside. I don't have an approximation because I was trying to keep this as open as close as I got to this committee amount. But those are interesting responses as well, as we're understanding reserves and telling the story of why there might be large amounts, because these are not cheap things to pay for, that I think are important for the committee to see.
All right. Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You said immediate needs of 1.7 billion, is that correct?
Correct.
Well, if we go with the high end of what's being suggested of 100 million, what is that, 7% of the immediate need, 8% of the, or I can't do that math in my head without a calculator, but it's very small percentage, that 100 million, I can't believe I'm saying this, of the immediate need out there. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, that is one of the comments we're going to speak, I think, with Director Ryman's comments about how much need is really out there, and the starter package that the Joint Minerals Committee is considering, we don't think will dent if you want to see real change.
Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, sorry, we're going to drill a little deeper into this. Of that 1.7, and we have to understand that's a third, not even a third. So, I mean, if in the probably best case scenario, we're more like 6 billion probably, or 5 change. If we look at that, how much of that is because of the federal mandates on water systems and lead and some of that stuff? I'm getting a 0 behind you, but I'd like to know how much of that could be that. So the reason I'm asking is there a place where we could tap into maybe some federal funding to offset some of these water issues? Because I know in my community, we have some lines that aren't problematic by nature, but now have become problematic because of federal mandates. And so can you talk a little bit of the federal mandate versus failing water system? Like we were in Rawlins last month and we were, or 2 months ago or whatever it was, and we're looking at definite issues because we have old system that needs replaced. But let's talk about maybe some of that federal and what's falling apart and what needs to be replaced because of federal regulation.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Haroldson, these are all excellent questions, and one that my members are facing every day of needs versus wants, and then, unfunded mandates, not just from our state, but from our federal partners, and one that our association works hard to help clarify and help them look for funding for. The LCLR, which is lead copper line replacement, is something that there's headlines today in the paper about trying to find funding for it, let alone where you have City of Rawlins that has a system that is looking to fail any moment now. So I didn't ask him that question of which of these are the LCLR lines we're working on, but that's something we can add on. That I also hope that, and I was looking for the Senate file number, but the infrastructure and water study that we're working closely with DEQ, it's out to bid. They were trying to get us turnkey so we could figure out, Rawlins is going to be our test case baby. That's the first one that we're going to have in that study. And then having other communities ready to go so they can answer and drill down on those questions because they know we need, because they were saying 4 years. We need immediate answers now. So I don't have those exact answers, but that is something we're going to keep drilling down on, and it's a problem.
All right. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I'm proud to be supported by Christy Haswell, a Sheridan County Commissioner that is with me today. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to work down through the document that we submitted, and I will relate it back to the bill that you have before you and provide our comments. Feel free to stop me at any point in time if you have questions about any of the headings. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to start on page 1 of that document down in terms of the funding amount and source. I'll start by saying that we are recommending an appropriation, an annual appropriation of $75 million moving forward. Now, if you look back at the historical numbers, and you heard this from Mr. Richards, the appropriation ran anywhere from about $9+ million per year, all the way up to just over $85 million. We don't think that the $75 million is really out of the realm of what the needs are out on the ground in the current environment, as well as what we've seen in terms of inflation around infrastructure costs over the course of the past decade when we haven't had this program. So that's really what got us to our recommendation. Mr. Chairman, as you heard, the Minerals Committee has elected to sort of supercharge, is I think the way that it was phrased, by providing $100 million per year in the first 2 years, and then $50 million thereafter. They're electing to fund that from the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account. If you look at our document, we certainly say that is a possibility of where you might fund this. I would just make one note. Unless you adopt some sort of a consumer price index escalator around that particular appropriation, in a decade, you're going to be still appropriating $50 million unless you've changed statute, which really only means that you're going to have less buying power a decade from now around what the needs are at the local level. Mr. Chairman, that committee also started out, let me back up. You could look at establishing some sort of a permanent trust. And I bring that forward because House leadership has talked about this particular concept with me in the past. And it is certainly a possibility. The nice thing around that particular approach is that it would have some ability to generate additional revenue over time in recognition of the need at the local level. Perhaps one of the downsides of that particular approach is that it requires a pretty hefty front-end appropriation in order to establish that. And I put some numbers in the document. You're talking roughly $1.5 billion to about $2 billion in order to generate $75 million to $100 million per year and still allow for some of that growth in that particular approach. You could look at sales and use tax, similar to what we did with direct distribution this last year. $75 million is roughly equatable to 8% again of the state portion of sales and use tax. The value of that, of course, is that as revenues are generated from sales and use tax, over time they generally kind of go up. So there would be some additional appropriation. So there are various ways you can do this. You could look at above the cap mineral royalties, plenty of others, as you're well aware, Or you could perhaps even package these into multiple approaches. Maybe you want to come at it from, we're going to make an appropriation of some amount on an annual basis, but we're also going to set aside something that goes into a trust fund that allows that to grow to a point where that then ultimately takes over and you can shut off the other funding valve. So just trying to keep that conversation going and letting you know some of our thoughts around that. Mr. Chairman, from the document that I provided, I'm now going to page 4, eligible uses, and that falls in your draft bill. Also on page 4, lines 16 through 20. And what we are really trying to articulate there is our belief that you shouldn't just authorize this for capital construction projects, that you should allow for major maintenance. There's good reason that you should allow that. And I would just say your draft bill incorporates that concept, and the Minerals Committee did as well. So I think you're on the right track there. The only thing that I would also mention, and it's come up a little bit in the conversation, and Ms. Blackwell talked about it, is this is critical funding that helps us to unlock some of those other things. So you mentioned federal grants or funding opportunities, Representative Haroldson. This certainly could be part of that equation to help us unlock additional resources to come back here. Some have asked me, well, should you be able to match this funding against other state funding sources? I would just throw that out for you. I don't know that we've had that conversation, but maybe that's something that needs to be as well considered, so that we're not prohibited from, maximizing this resource to do good things. Mr. Chairman, I'm moving over to page 5 of our document, and that's the allocation formula. And I did provide you with a brief spreadsheet trying to just give you a sense of what appropriations might look at the 50 million, 75 million, and $100 million threshold, since that's what Minerals is talking about, and we've mentioned the 75 million. The first column there is just reporting to you what allocations would have looked like under the historic formula. So it was in that era, an 80-20 formula. On the far right is what it looks like with the 70-25 or 75-25 that you've adopted in this particular bill. So 75% generally around population, 25% around the inverse of assessed valuation. So you can see what that looks like across the three options. The middle one takes an alternative approach, and it really tries to say, what if we took the first 20% of whatever is appropriated and gave that as a base allocation to each county, and then the remainder of it was distributed out entirely based on population. The value for that is that if you look at Niobrara County as probably the easiest example in that document, they actually benefit from having that base allocation that they don't go below. Otherwise, they're going to see about $300,000 at the $50 million level to split amongst the county and their several municipalities there. So, but I would not come to you and say that we've settled on any one of these ideas for you. I'm not particularly put off by the approach that you've put in this bill. It was just simply trying to provide some different examples of how you could allocate this funding. And we're certainly happy to look at others if you'd like. Mr. Chairman, I'm now going to go to the bottom of page 6 and talk about timelines and the countywide consensus plan. And I really appreciate that this is a conversation that you're having here. One, I think it is our belief that the timeline should be longer than 2 years. In our document, we put 4 years as that timeline. I would also say that we should think about what terms we use. I think in the bill, you use the word encumbered. We have tried to look at it in terms of, I've got encumbered in there, but we've also tried to look at it as unobligated because the reality is with some of these dollar figures, depending on what project you're looking at, it may take you several years of accumulations for the town of Lusk to ultimately be able to tackle that project. And I would really hate for us to penalize them if it's actually going to take them 5 years. And we've always known that it's going to take them 5 years to get there. So I would say give us 4 years to make sure we have it obligated towards something. But if it takes 5 or 6 years to actually get the project, don't penalize us for that either. Mr. Chairman, the other thing that that we incorporate into our recommendation here is the notion that your local governments should, through this consensus process, come up with some sort of a countywide consensus plan, something that they're thinking about how they're going to be utilizing this funding over the long term, so that it's not just we came in with the newest wish list that we have. We've actually been planning to do these sorts of projects over time, which could ultimately lead you into the economic development conversation. But we want to be able to show you that we're doing this deliberately as we utilize this funding. So you see that concept embedded in our recommendation there. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move over to page 8 of our document. Population calculations, I'm not going to belabor this. You've adopted and incorporated into your bill draft our recommendation of using the state decennial census from the most 3 recent years. The idea being that there are communities that have population spikes, and we ought to account for that in here. So you've incorporated that, and we think that's a good thing. Mr. Chairman, next up on page 8 is the consensus threshold. If you go back historically, it was the county plus 70%, municipalities representing 70% of the incorporated population. And I put it in the document, you look at Natrona County, City of Casper already sits above that threshold. So it could just take the county plus the municipalities. So what we tried to do is say, okay, what approach could we adopt that maybe even exists out there? And we found, and this is actually something that we revised early in my tenure with the association, is the sales and use tax local option approach. And in that instance, it is the county plus 50% of the municipalities gets you to your threshold in order to put that out to the voters and under whatever framework you're going to utilize. So we've worked together and we have consensus that this is a good approach to try and take under this process moving forward. So we're just stealing from our sales and use tax statutes, and I believe you could talk to LSO. I think they've just captured directly from what we're trying to recommend in that regard. Mr. Chairman, moving over to page 9 of our document, you'll see in a couple places in the draft bill that there is some suggestion that maybe we need to consider definitions. So we tried to do that ourselves and provide you some thoughts around what does it mean to develop a countywide consensus plan? What does major maintenance and repair or public facilities and infrastructure mean? So we bring these definitions to you. Not to hide the ball, because this came up in the Minerals Committee, and I want to bring it up here. Some will ask about, well, what about vehicles? And under the historic program, it was open to, the purchase of vehicles for capital projects. There's been some question, should we constrain that? Should it just be vehicles that are for emergency or public, water and sewer infrastructure? Should it be limited to that, or should we just take it out entirely? We started with it in there, but we're certainly open to the conversation with you about what that should look like in relationship to that in particular. As part of the definitions, we also tried to say what isn't included within those definitions. So if you look at, I'll just use this one because it's right in front of me. Major maintenance and repair, we have in there that it doesn't include reoccurring operational, custodial, and prevented activities performed at regular intervals, trying to get at the things that we should probably be picking up and accounting for relationship to those activities. We shouldn't be buying printers. I know that came up at the last meeting. So we're trying to exclude some of those things from these with the use of these definitions as well. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I'll just close with the program integration. There's been lots of questions around MRG, BRC, and countywide consensus. And it's just to say we need more time to be thinking about what that integration looks like. Yep.
Sorry to interrupt you, but Senator Larson has a comment or a question.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a comment on the your wording, vehicles integral to delivery of public service. Is that like a garbage truck? Are we talking fire truck, ambulance, police car? It's pretty wide.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Larson, you're getting at what our intention is to focus in on those particular types of vehicles over others, but we are certainly welcome to continue working with you on refining that definition as needed.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Okay, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I'm really done and happy to take any questions that you or the committee have. Just to reiterate, thank you for working on this issue, and we're happy to continue refining and bringing you back recommendations based on your drafts.
Thank you. Any further questions? Representative Alaman. I promised to get to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for clarification, the 75 million that you folks are proposing, that's yearly, that's not biennium, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Alaman, you're correct. It's an annual figure that we're recommending.
Okay. Mr. Riemann, you heard me ask the question about giving the county, sort of veto power, 50% of the vote really. And I understand that the county represents all the unincorporated citizens, whereas the other portion of the voting would be all of the incorporated citizens. But that 50%, or that veto power, is it appropriate in your mind? I know that this is kind of modeled after the sales tax vote, but is this the right way to go? We have an opportunity to get this right, and I want to make sure we do.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I do think this is the right way to go. Under the old program, under what we were recommending through the budget amendment process this year, it has always been the county plus. I tend to look at this approach similar to what Representative Sherwood was attempting to articulate, and I don't bring this up often. I don't want to create a wedge, but remember, county commissioners represent all of the citizens of the county, whether they're inside of a municipal boundary or otherwise. And I think commissioners take that very seriously, their responsibility to support municipalities. So I don't think this is a wedge issue for us or for my counterpart. She certainly can speak for her constituents, but I do think that what is articulated here is a consensus position.
With that, I think we're ready to move on. Representative Pendergrass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to take just a second and congratulate Commissioner Haswell. Her son Beck was an integral part of the best high school football team Wyoming has ever seen. And now he's going to be wearing brown and gold down in Laramie. So congratulations,
Thank you.
Beck.
And more importantly, as a mom with his big brother. So it's one trip. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just wanted to provide an example to support some comments that were made. Mr. Raymond's comments about kind of the timeline, the reversion, and Representative Alleman's comment about making that a 4-year window. The Sheridan Area Water Supply Joint Powers Board, of which Mayor Bridger's chair right now, is working on a project on Gulch Road. We approached the state for emergency MRG funding. We were turned down. We came back 4 months later. We were successful. We then began, or slightly before then, started working on USDA rural development funding for the other piece of it. And then we had the government shutdown. They would like to have the funding allocated by September, but hopefully we get the funding and it takes a month for contracting and to get a hold of those dollars. Now we've lost a construction season and we're into the winter. And this is a small project. We'll be able to knock it out in the following summer. But again, this is a small project. And I think for some of those larger ones, it would be critical to be able to hold on to that funding. For the example that Mr. Ryman gave in Lusk, and of course in Rollins, as we talked about, I think it was 70 million that was discussed at that meeting that they would need to overhaul their water system. That's something that we'll be watching. So I appreciate your work on this. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions or comments for the commissioner? All right. Thank you very much for being here and attending. I think with that, we'll be able to wrap up public comment and this particular bill. Ms. Vaughn or Director Richards, is there anything I'm missing? Okay. All right. And we have a couple of tours that we're going to adjourn and make. So we'll go ahead and adjourn for this evening. We'll be back here at 8:30 tomorrow morning to cover many other subjects. But thank you to everyone for paying attention to the Wyoming Business Council debate today.